Do you believe a person can actually be scared to death?
It's Sissy's Soup.
Well, people here do. It happened years and years ago, just a few miles down the road. The old-timers know about it, but they won't talk about it. I know the story. You see, there were these 3 boys who used to terrorize Riverview, especially around Halloween time. They teepeed houses, they soaked car windows, they left roadkill on people's porches. They did just about any annoying thing they could think of. Their names were Jimmy Swanson, Randy Little, and Bob Johnson. Jimmy Swanson was the ringleader. Jimmy was a bully in school. His daddy had run off when he was just a baby, and his mama spent a lot of time exercising her elbow, if you know what I mean. People said Jimmy Swanson was bad blood. Well, this one year, it was October and Jimmy and his cronies were getting ready. They stockpiled toilet paper and soap, and they stole some eggs from the widow Collins and left them outside to get rotten. Well, somehow Jimmy heard there was a witch house back in the woods off Rodine Road. It was a place where a coven of witches was supposed to get together to practice their evil rituals. He told his buddies about it, but they just laughed at him. Jimmy made it clear that he was going up there on Halloween, and they were going with him. Well, Bob and Randy knew better than to buck him, so they agreed to go. They thought it would be funny at least. Jimmy was obsessed. He was determined to see the witches. And he got his wish. Jimmy wanted to be at the house at midnight, so the first part of Halloween, they had time for soaping windows and egging cars and teepeeing houses. But at 11 o'clock, Jimmy insisted that they head up to Rodine Road to see what was going on. Well, Joe Turner said he'd given the boys a ride just about 11:15. He dropped them off and he said they were in good spirits. Well, nobody knows the details of what happened after that. Well, somebody knows, but I doubt they will ever tell. Bob and Randy told part of the story. The 3 boys walked up the driveway to the old clapboard house. They snuck up on the porch and looked inside. They couldn't believe what they saw. There were about a dozen people in long robes with hoods, standing in a circle. There were candles lit and some strange singing, chanting probably. The boys couldn't really tell what was going on. The people's faces were covered by their hoods. Somebody was holding up a cup, and then they passed it around and each one took a drink, sort of like communion. The boys were fascinated, and they stood there and watched. But all of a sudden, they heard a twig crack behind them. They turned around, and there was someone standing in the shadows. Bob and Randy said later they couldn't see who it was in the dark. They didn't know if it was a man or a woman until he hollered out, "Intruders!" Well, then all hell broke loose. The people inside came rushing onto the porch. Bob and Randy ran away, but Jimmy Swanson just stood there on the porch like he was frozen. Bob said that he looked back and he saw them making a circle around Jimmy. Well, those boys got out of there as quick as they could. They told later they could hear Jimmy screaming for help. They kept running till they got to 301. They got a ride. The man that picked them up said they were hysterical. They went to Bob's house, but Bob's daddy just thought it was all a prank. But they were so upset and they carried on so much, he finally got two of his buddies and headed up to the witch house. The boys refused to go with them. Well, the men said they found the house easily enough, but when they got there, it was empty. There wasn't a sign that anybody had been there in years. They looked around for a while, but they didn't see anything, so they were convinced that the boys had tricked them. But as they were coming back out of the driveway, the car lights caught something just off the road. It was Jimmy Swanson, tied to a tree. His eyes were as big as saucers, and his body was rigid. He was dead. When the coroner examined him, there wasn't a mark on him. The autopsy showed he died of a massive heart attack. He was 15 years old. Well, people said he died of fright, that whatever he saw or whatever happened to him, it just scared him to death. There didn't seem to be any other explanation. The other boys didn't fare too well either. Bob was never the same after that. He started drinking and then got into drugs. He was always telling people, "They're after me, they're after me. They talk to me in my sleep." He stayed high for the next 20 years and finally died of an overdose. Randy went crazy. They had to put him in the state mental hospital in Arcadia. A few years later, they found him dead in his room. There were no marks on his body. Another massive heart attack, so they said. A few months after they found Jimmy Swanson tied to the tree, a few of the good Christian menfolk went out there and burned that house to the ground. They cut down the tree where they found Jimmy and they burned that too. But nothing could restore people's peace of mind, because now we know there are witches living amongst us. Witches who kill. To this day, they say that if you're on Rodine Road on Halloween night up by where that house was, you can hear Jimmy Swanson screaming. Well, I'll never know because I'm not going up there. Well, enough of this foolishness. Better go check your house and make sure all the doors are locked. Well, and I really mean it, it's good to quit talking to you. Now go on. Get out of here. Bye-bye.